I'm delighted, and you should be delighted too, that we have Mary Jo O'Keefe to talk to us this morning. I would say briefly, except I don't think Mary Jo knows what brief is. But nonetheless, she is local, and she is an absolute hive of information.
Oh.
So Mary's going to give us maybe 20 minutes or so, and I will try and direct what Mary Jo tells us, insofar as that's possible, to corral her knowledge into little packages. But she's an unbelievable source of information. So what we're going to do then is once we listen to Mary, we're going to walk up the side of the hill here as far as that horizontal earthen bank, about a third of the way up the hill. Once we get there, we'll gather together again, and I'll talk about the landscape, how this incredible landscape came to be, the forces that moulded it, the changes that are currently happening, relating back to what we were talking about yesterday, how the landscape is changing, how it's evolving, and then we'll go sideways across to the actual village itself, spend a bit of time there. I'll talk about the village, I'll talk about how it evolved, I'll talk about its rise, its fall, and we'll spend quite a bit of time talking about bullying, transhumance. For our German friends, it's the movement of animals from summer pasture to winter pasture and back again. Heidi is the classic transhumance person, the taking her cattle up the side of the mountain in the summers and then bringing them back up with Grandpa, living with Grandpa up a mountain. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. So and then we'll dander back to here. And then we'll get you to your lunch at 1 o'clock in Ted's. All right. So this is Mary Jo.
Hello.
And Mary, I'll just let you introduce yourself, and I'll try and prompt a few questions.
Please,
here.
please.
Yeah.
Slievemore Maha, Céad Míle Fáilte, go Bonapaya. Welcome to Bonapaya. That is where we are standing at this minute. Now, my voice can go croaky very quickly because it gets dry. So please, anyway, you're very, very welcome to Eoin and to all our friends, or he will call you friends, and from Germany and from all parts of the world, and even from Kiel and Dooega, whatever else, to these parts. But anyway, you're standing now in what was Bonapaya, this little hamlet here. And Bonapaya means the bottom, the Gaelic. All our townlands, all our place names are Gaelic. And it meant the bottom of the Faya was a good land park, whereas where I come from over in Cloughmore, it's self-explanatory. It means rocky place. Cloughmore. But anyway, as I say, Bonapaya, when I was growing up across in the village of Cloughmore, we would come this way and we would have sheep and cattle, and we got to know every nook and cranny that had names in the place, and they're very historic in the place. We were always intrigued by the village that Eoin now is going to lead you to, up on the side of the hill there. So he'll explain the clans or the settlements, and it was called Túr Riwa. And Túr means a slope, and Riwa means it was speckled or flat, striped, but it was good arable land. And it was, as Eoin will tell you, it was obviously a very big settlement. And my father lived to be 105, and he died 7 years ago. And I'll have to say he had a very clear mind. And anything I have would be basically from him. And for what I heard through the villages. But anyway, I'm sorry about the throat. Anyway, he talked about Túr Riwa, and it was a very thriving place. But it was on the ball maps in the 1890s, but it seemed to have disappeared. And maybe Eoin would throw light on where did they go to. But the few snippets I had about people that lived in it, somebody came along way back in the hundreds of years. Was it John O'Donovan or was it somebody else doing a census of the place, had the counting, and there was no road, and it was a long way up to the top of that hill, maybe after a long day's work, traipsing through every townland in the place. And he asked the local, who lives in Gaelic it was, who lives in that house up there, the last house up at the top of the hill? And the answer he got was, Sean the Gloch, John of the Stones. Now, was it Johnston? He wrote down, we don't know. But my source, my great-uncle said he thought he was O'Malley, which would be from the area. Another one, there were some dodgy characters around here long ago, and apart now from the people that lived here in Bonafaya, I heard...
They were all dodgy, I hear.
No. Not as dodgy as the mine I found. This fella, he had a terrible reputation. He was called the Cahir Brother. Cahir is an old Gaelic Achill name for Charles, and Brother wasn't a very nice name to call anybody. So I don't know what his surname was, but he was here, and from a couple of sources, including my father, he was the last man living in this area before he moved off. Well, he ended up on the gallows, actually, eventually, and he deserved it.
Can you tell us, Mary, about, and I know you don't like using the term coffin road or the mass road or whatever, but the movement of people from Keel area to Kildownet?
Oh yes, so you're going up now towards there. Way back a couple of 100 years ago, we had in Kildownet, where I live over the road from me, was the church in the old cemetery. If you were ever there, there's history in that cemetery, well worth a visit at some time. And people came to their every Sunday across the hills from down Ducanella side, crossed up over Minnon, no roads, down, wrong through, there's no roads, as I say, and they could come in the gap in there, above where you're going now, and they crossed over and out. If you look up towards the other hill, the higher hill there on your left, you see a gap then, and they went out there and down into Kildownet. But when somebody died, they carry them on, well, I suppose beers you'd call it, Maggie Crohan, we called it. It was a sort of for carrying the corpse. And they carried it, can you imagine? Rain, hail or storm, and carried along that trail and down into the graveyard.
And the locks or the lats on a...
Everybody that was with the coffin, with the funeral, they would make a cairn. And there are quite a number of them in that lot, the Owen, if you ever...
And they were for resting the coffin, were they?
Yes,
that's
and
what I heard.
Sort of a memorial as well, I think. But strangely, I was there once when I was live here, and the hill above it is called Logadoon, and that means Doon was a sort of prehistoric for where fortress where supposedly
rats, dunes.
Yes, in it. And I think there was a bit of something paganism attached to it. Or maybe I'm wrong. I'm really just surmising my own thoughts on it, you know.
Yeah.
But the people of Turiwa, there was another house at the very end, and growing up I heard it. It had its gable towards the sea, and it was a good enough house, as houses go. It'll be you won't be going that far on now today.
Yeah.
But that house, in front of it, was a lovely green little field. And the explanation we heard from my folks was that there was so much milk, they were very well off. And the man's name was Frank Moore, meaning Big Frank. Don't know what his surname was. Don't know what happened to him. Did he go across then into Welsh? I think he did, into that other village. But in front of the house was this green field among all the heather, like you could see. And it lasted for a long, long time, but it's just disappeared now.
Right.
The heather has encroached on it. But the reason for it was that there's so much milk to spare that you spill the milk out. And I suppose whatever calcium or whatever was in the milk went into the ground and green grass.
Right.
You know, it was amazing. So that was another, but I don't know his surname. I don't know what happened to him, but Frank Moore left there.
Yeah, and so I'm sorry for driving this conversation to stuff that I'm really interested in, but there's a series of killeens. So for those of you who don't know what a killeen is, I was telling Mary we had an extraordinarily emotional site visit. I don't know how many of you were with us in Mweelin when we visited the killeen that overlooking Mweelin Beach. So killeens are places where in our wonderfully Christian church, we decided that there was no room for unbaptized children to be buried in holy ground. And so children who died before they could be baptized were put into these separate killeens, as they're called. René did some work on the killeens around Achill and the Carrowgarve Peninsula. But Mary, there are two down here. Is that right?
Yeah, on the maps. The killeen na Báistí is down towards, as you pointed out, towards where we call the ship, where the
big inlet.
Yeah.
Big inlet down here.
It seemed to be down on that point, I think. But to me, what our was, we called farther over in the townland of Claggan, which is the next townland over after that fence, Owen. You had killeen na Báistí. Same thing, Páiste as a child. And in the year 2000, wasn't it, when the bishop asked and we had a ceremony over there and we said prayers and holy water, etc. My father led it that day over to our killeen na Lano. And it's out on the edge of it's a lovely sheltered place out on the edge of the sea. I believe those killeens were situated at the edge of townlands or at the sea. But I asked my father then about it. I said, look, babies were, infant mortality was in those times. In his time, he was born in 1912. I said, Cloughmore, where were the babies unbaptized buried, or where were they? Oh, he said, we brought them to the graveyard and we buried them in the graveyard. So Cloughmore people were kind of different. And they did. Because, but in the other villages, in the 1950s, across the hill in Ashleam and in Dooega, and as you say, there were children buried, but not in Cloughmore. They were buried with they were a bit rebellious anyway. Yeah. And they buried them in the graveyard over in Kildownet, you know? Yeah. So he said... very quietly. He didn't. I don't think so.
It speaks more of the local priest being slightly more sensitive than or slightly more or less rules based.
Well, no, he was the same parish, it was the same thing, but I think it was the people themselves that took it on themselves to do the right thing, which they did. But he didn't remember. Now, remember, he was born in 1912, and the mortality rate among the newborn babies was high. He himself had lost 3 siblings, you know, before he was the youngest of 8. And they had been toddlers when they died, you know. But it was a very sad thing to do, to have to that. But that's over in the townland of Claggan. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
so Claggan is so if you look behind you, Claggan, correct me if I'm wrong now, Mary, but Claggan is that crest of higher ground that you see with the cultivation ridges very obviously, and the very clear bank that you can see running towards the sea halfway up the hill. That's the townland boundary. So that's Claggan on this side, and then this is
Bonafaya and Torrewa, and it belongs to Dooega DED, I know. Yeah. But do you want to know about the poor Spanish Armada?
Oh, yeah. Talk about that. That's a good story. Yeah.
Theory again.
Yeah.
in the 1950s, across that to Claggan, as we called it, that's where we cut our turf, peat for the fire. And this man, he was cutting his turf, and across that hillock, he threw out a sod and it was full of coins. And the poor man thought he had hit it rich. And they all gathered around, and I suppose they desecrated the site, but they were digging, and he had to, looking around as a man, but he had a bigger cap than anyone here on him. And it filled the cap with the coins, and they were Spanish coins. And as a child, the museum took them, I believe, but the ones that were of no value, we used them playing in our childhood with them. And I remember trying to scrub them to try to see what was written on them.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, here's what I asked Eoin about. Was it, the Spanish Armada came along and they were heading over and they were off Clare Island. Did this poor man swim ashore over there, just over past you, the corner there, clambered up the cliff, and did he sight the lights up here? Did he bury his loot, or was he buried with? Did he die and covered on the turf? Don't know, but love to know.
Yeah, great story.
Love to know.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I must. What I must do on that basis, you can contact the National Museum, and you can basically ask, what happened to the
coins,
the coins, and because there's huge interest now in Armada archaeology, underwater archaeology, and what's happened more recently in the state here is we're beginning to protect. Not only are protecting land-based sites, but we're protecting marine sites. So up until recently, anybody could dive on any site and do anything to any site. But now, known sites are all protected. So there's a huge interest in the Armada, and indeed right up to if you go on the National Monuments website and you look at the National Monuments website and you click a button, it'll show you all the known historic wrecks. Yeah. And all of the wrecks are dotted around the coastline here, and you click on a button and it'll tell you the name of the ship and how many people died and where the ship is going. So a fantastic resource. But I do suspect that it was probably some Spaniard who came and I would think he probably said, now I'll just, I don't want to be caught with this money on me. I'll put it in here. I'll go off.
Not around here, we hope. But anyway. But what else now? What did you?
No, I was just the idea that people from the area of Kiel and stuff would travel of a Sunday to Mass over here in Clockmore.
And just remember too, the custom. Just remember, there would be a baby born on a Saturday night in a house, and next day that baby, if it were born on Saturday night, was taken. The mother wouldn't travel. Would be taken to the church to be baptised.
Right.
Now, can you imagine that? And in the winter, in the winter. No, that was it. Can you imagine? It was more I hate the term coffin trail because it was more than that.
Yeah.
There was more than that happening along. You can imagine the fun and the teenagers and meeting those people up there in Turio. I often imagine that say, oh, here comes people from Ducanella, and out to greet them. And that. Now, in 1864, my own great grandparents got married in Kildownet. Over that it was, I suppose, and 3 other couples, 2 from Dooega, 2 they were, came across. Can you imagine crossing the hill? Well, my were from the other side, but those 3 other couples came from, as I call it, Lower Achill. And across the hill. Can you imagine the gaiety and the fun and the talk and who was with them along that trail? So it was more than just a coffin trail. But people then during the famine to bury their dead in Kildownet, and they weren't even in coffins. And they tried to give them a dignity of burial in Kildownet graveyard. And there's from one story I have from folklore, from a man who witnessed it, who was born in the village of Alge across the hill. And he talks about how himself and his mother and his young sister were standing in the doorway in one of the houses over in the village of Elch. And this man from Dooega came across, and he had his father strapped like you have now your knapsack on you. And his father, he had him, we call it in Gaelic, I have to turn to the Gaelic terms, Irish law. I don't know, straps. Irish, it was Irish, you have Irish, you're bagging in Irish, yeah. And he had his father strapped to his back. And they were coming down by this man's house. And he said, the mother said to the little girl, I think he said she was 8 years of age, to go and for in the name of God, to lift the feet, not to be trailing the mud.
Extraordinary.
So,
Extraordinary.
yeah.
So, on that happy note, as the man says, for our German friends, if you don't want to tell the story, just tell me. But can you relate the story about the house? Just because it is Heinrich Böll, and he did mention it.
Yeah, and I think Claudia King is here, is she?
Yeah, she's behind there. Yeah.
Are you Claudia? Hello, Claudia.
So this is a great story, but tell it away there.
It's in Heinrich's in his book, and he recalls of a winter's night, Dr. King, old Dr. Ned King, coming to deliver a baby, in that house, but they lived, I think, maybe in this before they built that house.
Was it this house?
Is it that? Yeah, he did. So you're in a very, very, you have great connections with here. Yeah.
So it's a lovely connection of
Isn't it? No, I'm delighted, and Owen, thank you very much for coming to try and unravel Turewa for us.
No, Mary, you're an absolute wealth of knowledge, and can I? Sorry.
Is this the most beautiful feat that's done?
Yeah. So, well,
Of the most beautiful feat, yeah. It's my favourite.
Well, it's this house apparently now.
Yeah, it is. Is it that? Is it? Yeah. Good. Yeah.
Well, we have Rene first-hand information. So
yeah.
Although you were probably not around at that stage, were you? Were you born? It was when you were very good. So there you are. So yeah. Yeah. It's a lovely sort of.
It's a great connection.
Lovely
isn't
connection.
it now? Yeah.
Because obviously we've been many's a time to Slievemore Deserted Village. We all know Heinrich Böll's love of that. But it's just interesting that a little story that appeared. We're now at the
site. Yeah.
So can I thank Mary, and can you all give Mary appreciation? It was fantastic.
Thank you, Mark.
Yeah. Well done, Mary.
And enjoy your trip up to Turewa.
All I can say is, Mary, it won't be the last time I'll be calling on you. Now, as the man says, now they know where you live.
Yeah.
So all I can say is we were privileged for that half an hour with Mary. Fantastic to get that, and you can see it and you can hear it in her voice how passionate she is about it. And I think that's 99.9% of somebody being able to impart information if you're enthusiastic about what you're talking about, because otherwise it just becomes blah 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 blah. Anyway, here we are. So turn around, guys, and feast your eye on that. Feast is absolutely right. Somebody said to me, "Do you remember that thing you did last year with the tape?" And they said, "That was great, you know. Can we do that again?" And I said, "Can we do it again? Well, not so sure." So I said, because everybody likes a visual prop. So time is hugely important, both archaeologically, geologically, historically. And I was just, when I was, and I won't say when I was coming down here to give this talk, months ago when I was preparing for this talk, I said to myself, what can I do to give people an idea of time? And I thought 1, 10, 100, 1,000. And 1, 10, 100,000, they're sort of nice sort of units to think about life. Last year, what were we doing last year? Last year we were over in the Cronóg, and we were all having a great time learning about sphagnum moss and Cronóg. 10 years ago, what we were doing. 10 years ago, we were over in Mweelin. We had a fantastic discussion about the whole impact of Nangle and the school and stuff, which led serendipitously to the publication of The Preacher and the Prelate. 100 years ago was the Irish Free State, give or take. 1,000 years ago, we were battling the Vikings in Clontarf, give or take. In a few years, the Normans were going to invade 1066, and that opened an entire chapter of history. So 10,000 years ago, there was nobody on Ireland. The Mesolithic people hadn't yet arrived. And the Mesolithic people, who were the first hunter-gatherers, they came in, we now think they probably came in from the Isle of Man into sort of Dublin, the Dublin area. When we were all growing up, we used to think they all came in from Scotland because it was close. But actually now what they're finding is that the earliest material that they're finding in Scotland is the derivation of material from Northern Ireland. So in fact, it was the other way around. The Mesolithic people actually moved into Scotland. 100,000 years ago. 100,000 years ago, we were the first Homo sapiens was found in Israel. So we had moved out of Africa into the Near East. 100,000 years ago, 1,000,000 years ago. 1,000,000 years ago, we weren't here. Our ancestors were. Homo erectus was wandering around Africa. The name Homo erectus basically is the next stage when we went from more or less going along on all fours like a chimpanzee to standing up. And one of the major developments in Homo erectus was the use of tools as manufactured tools, as opposed to, we now know, of course, that chimpanzees and gorillas and everybody else, they use tools. But the difference is that Homo erectus was actually forming his own tools. So he was shaping rocks and stuff. 1,000,000 years ago, 10 million years ago. 10 million years ago, the landscape consisted of open grasslands across vast areas of the land masses. 100 million years ago, and this is really interesting, 100 million years ago was when ants first appeared. Okay, so my bet, when we feck up this world, the ants and the termites are going to be the next people who take over. So there'll be legions of ants and termites have developed and evolved, and they'll be looking at all the mess we made along this plastic layer that they keep finding on the planet when they go digging, and that's us. So that's 100 million years ago. 100 million years ago, we were crawling. When I say we, it was the evolution of sea creatures onto land. 100 million years ago. 1,000, so 1 billion years ago. 1 billion years ago was 4.6 billion years ago was the Earth forming. And then 34.4 billion years ago was the Big Bang. Okay, so we go in 1, 10, 100, 1,000, and we keep going back, and we end up back in the Big Bang. Fantastic. However, talk among yourselves while I load it up.
Okay.
It's like blowing into a breathalyzer. I'm blowing up the world, guys. I'm blowing up the world. Okay, the world, and it's the world as we know it, more or less, given it's small and it's plastic, and Australia's definitely not the right shape. But so what I wanted to talk to you about again is this whole concept of geology. Okay, I've talked to you an awful lot about the movement of plate tectonics and stuff, and I still think people can't quite get their head around it. So what we're looking at today is where all of these land masses are currently, okay? But back in the day, as you can see, anybody looking at this globe can see that the shape of South America and the shape of Africa, quite clearly, if it's not beyond the bounds of possibility that at some stage they joined in there, okay? And equally, the geology that you find along the coast of Newfoundland is exactly the same as the geology you find in Scotland and Northern Ireland. And quite clearly, at some stage, they were much closer. The reason why there is serious volcanic activity in Iceland is because there is a seam that runs all the way down the Atlantic, more or less down the seam of the globe here. And what's happening is that those two land masses are moving apart. Around here, India is moving north and bumping into the Eurasian landmass, creating the Himalayas. And the reason why you have what they call the Ring of Fire, which is all the way around the San Andreas Fault, is the famous one over here on the west coast of America. But you have a ring of fire running all the way around the Pacific, is because on both sides of that plate they're diving down into the ground, so they're causing tensions. The last major earthquake that happened in Afghanistan and northern Turkey was because Africa is moving up still, crunching into the bottom of Europe, causing earthquakes and causing land masses to shift and move. But if you go back 800 million years, which is only yesterday, as the man says, everything that you see there was down here. Okay, every single bit of land, every single bit of ground was at the bottom down here, and everything else was water. Okay, so forget about this. Everything was splodged down here at the bottom of the south, around the South Pole, and that, where my fingers are, is where the current rocks that you're standing on originated. All right? Okay? So 800 million years ago, what started to happen was the land masses moved apart, and an ocean developed called the Iapetus Ocean developed between those two land masses. And Northern Ireland was on one coast, and Southern Ireland was on the other coast. And that does explain it. And and the bottom line is that there's a line that runs from Clawhead in County Louth. Well, no, Clawhead, County Louth. For those Germans who didn't know, that's a Clawhead accent. In case they're quasi speaking funny. Clawhead in County Louth, and it runs the whole way across to Galway Bay. All right? That, when the oceans came back together again, when that join happened, if you're standing on the north side of the Clawhead fault line, you're on what used to be the northern continent. And if you're on the south side of that line, you're on what used to be the southern continent. All right? So this all happened down here. So it opened up, a huge big ocean developed, and then it closed again. All right? Now, the reason why that's so interesting to us is because when the oceans developed down here, sediment and everything piled into that ocean, as it does out there today. And when the two land masses came back together again, they created the rocks that you're looking at. All right, so it's the crumpling. So the earth comes back together, the two land masses came back together again, and that crumpling created, literally, if you push it together, they just created crumples. So Benmore over in Kem Crohan, Slievemore, Menon, the mountain you're standing behind, that hill there, and half of Achill Beg is the crumple zone of that collision that happened 400 million years ago. All right? So originally, all of the rocks that you're standing on around here, by and large, were underneath an ocean that was down here. So Ireland wasn't down here. That's the thing you've got to get into your head. Ireland wasn't down here. England wasn't down here. There was no countries. There was rocks. So eventually the rocks obviously moved up, and that's as that Iapetus landmass split again and again and gradually started to form what we see today. Other rocks joined in, and we got the limestone down in the Burren, and we got the basalt up in the north, and but around here we got this, what they call the schist, which is all of this. All right. Eventually, after many millions of years, Ireland got to where it stands, and it became, well, it actually only became an island probably more than 10,000 years ago, because when the first Mesolithic people, they didn't walk across to Ireland, they had to come across by boat. So Ireland was an island before the first people came to it. Okay? But people could walk dry shod from the continent to England. Across Doggerland, it's now what it's known as. So there is a thing now in archaeology called Doggerland. And for those of you who listen, or up early enough to listen to the Viking Cromedies 40s, North Utsira, South Utsira on the thing, Dogger, Tyne, German, Dogger is a landmass that's under the North Sea that only got drowned when the ice finally melted from the last glaciation, which caused the water level to rise and flooded in and created an island of Britain. So Britain became an island, but Ireland was an island a long time before that. Okay? We do. We constantly tell them that, you know.
That's been discovered between South America, and Europe. That landmass that they have discovered that was not drowned.
Atlantis, yeah. Well, I don't know. I don't know anything about Atlantis. Simply, I don't know anything about it. Yeah. Well, without going off on a complete tangent, my understanding of the Atlantis is a problem with fluctuating sea levels in the Mediterranean, and that ancient cities got inundated in the Mediterranean basin, and that gave rise to the idea of there being an Atlantis. But we won't go there anyway. So now that we've got our landmass, and now that we have a solid bit of ground, the next major event that sculpted this landscape was ice. And there were two major ice events in this part of the world. The first was the Munsterian, which basically covered this entire ground to about 1 kilometre deep and extended out certainly beyond Bill's Rocks. Okay, Bill's Rocks is that lump of rock that you can see out there, and all the way down the coast. And the reason it's known as the Munsterian is because in Ireland, it's known as something completely, and this is bizarre, a bit like flower names. Every country has a different name for a different thing, but in Ireland it's called Munsterian. It's known as something completely different in Germany and France and wherever. But in Ireland it's known as the Munsterian, and the reason it is known as the Munsterian is because there is a place in Munster that wasn't affected by that glaciation. And therefore it was named, that was the limit of it, and therefore the limit was found in Munster, and therefore it was known as the Munsterian glaciation. That then retreated, climate change, climate warming, that retreated, and then it was an interglacial. An interglacial simply is a fluctuation, and a second glaciation appeared, and that's known as the Midlandian, and that's the one that affects Achill. And the Midlandian glaciation on Achill, we were all gobsmacked yesterday when we went for our walk, which is brilliant, over to the, as the man says, the far side, on the other side of the island. But it was quite clear, and people, and I was listening to people remarking that how different that side of the island is to this side of the island. And the reason for that is that side of the island got scarped by the Midlandian glaciation. The furthest west that glaciation went was halfway through Achill. So we're talking about 12 to 15,000 years ago. Okay, and that was it. That was as far as its extent. Okay, and so it came, and it as you go over to Duniver and stuff. If you're going from Bunnacurry, you climb over the top of Bunnacurry Hill and you go down a waggly road, and then you're out onto a plain. A plain as in a flat area of ground. And similarly, then when you come from Dugort or to Dugort, you come down from the crest of the hill past St. Thomas's, and then you're down onto a level ground. St. Thomas's Church, the side of Slievemore, the range of hills, the area in front of Bunnacurry, that was the point at which the glacier stopped. Beyond that point, there were local glaciers, and local glaciers is what created our landscape here. So you would have had a glacier coming over the top of that hill, and it would have swept down here out into the Atlantic. You would have another one coming down Ashleam, you had another one coming down, with Manon on one side and Dooega on the other down that valley. Basically, all the valleys that you see came, absolute classic example of a glacial valley, where you have that huge big U, and it just the local glacier came down, scarped out the centre of Kem, creating one of the best beaches in the world, according to whatever it is. But from our point of view, so we had a glacier with a whole pile of glacial beachers coming down this hill, and they were heading towards Clare Island. But there were two massive surges of ice that came, one from south heading north and the other from north heading south, and they met in Clew Bay, and they joined together, and they were forced out, dividing Clare Island in two. So one part of the ice went around one side, and the other part went around the other side, leaving, is it Benmore? Or is it, I think it's, leaving the summit free of ice. But that scarping created that face of cliffs that you can see on this side. The effect of ice, that originally Clare Island would have been sort of a more rounded feature, but the ice hitting the point end of it went round it and on out into the sea. And sub-ocean or sub-water surveys have shown the extent of the ice extending about maybe another kilometre or so out beyond Clare Island. Yeah. Not particularly, no. No, not particularly. No. During the Munsterian glaciation, yes, a lot of these mountains would have been rounded and would have been completely covered in ice. But then the second one, this Midlandian one, that allowed the top of Croghan, which is the biggest mountain at the far end of the island, that was never covered in ice in the second glaciation. And they know that because they've done geological analysis of the rocks that are still up there. They're not ice escarped. The same on top of that mountain, there was no ice scarping, so the ice never got up there. Yeah, but they do know, looking at the sides, exactly at what level the ice was. The other thing to keep in mind, when the ice melted, when the ice retreated and melted and moved backwards, the land, the weight of the ice on the land caused what they called isostatic response, which meant the land bounced back. So if you can imagine even holding this underwater, you let it go, it bounces, but it bounces back more than the surface. So the ice actually started to lift. And all the water that was contained in the ice before it all melted meant that that entire area out is probably certainly beyond Bill's Rocks and beyond. And all of the islands that you can see out there, the Innisbasham, Innismanish and Turk, that would have all been dry land. Really out as far, so you could have happily walked from here, if there were people on Achill or people on the island, of course. You'd happily walk out as far as Clare Island, dry shod. and you could have walked out to Bill's Rocks dry shod. And then what happened was, obviously, as the ice continued to melt, sea levels rose, and then the land mass settled again. But it didn't settle consistently. So when it bounced back slightly more in Ulster, up in Antrim, and slightly less down in Kerry. And so you have those, down in Kerry, you have those those inlets, those they're not quite fjord, but they're close enough. Killary Harbour is another one. You know, Dingle Peninsula, all the peninsulas down there. That's the reason why you get such inundation of sea down in Kerry, and you get raised beaches up in Antrim, because the old beaches that formed post glaciation up in Antrim and are continuing to rise, and the sea levels and the land levels down in Kerry are still falling. And it's not being helped, I hasten to add, by the fact that the ice is still releasing hundreds of trillions of gallons of fresh water from the ice cap back into the sea. And so we are going to have a serious problem. All our coastal areas are going to have a serious problem, as we discussed briefly yesterday. That's an extraordinary amount of information for you all to take in. Is there any questions about that? Good. So we're going to walk along. There's a bit of a stream. There's a clump of rocks there just ahead of you. So if we walk straight across over there, traverse the little gully, and then head out, you can actually see the village. It's just on the horizon. See where the sheep are? That's where we're going. Over to the sheep. It's when you walk through the deserted village, right? A lot of people don't know it, but there's an old road that wanders its way through the middle of the deserted village, and you can start it at Tor, which is almost as far as the quarry, and you can walk the whole way because there are three villages in Slievemore. Okay, there's not just one. There's Tor, Torrave, and Fachia. And Tor is the one that nobody goes to because it's over by the quarry. People only go to the first one. But so you have Tor, and then you have Torrave, and you got Fachia. And you can walk along the old road in the deserted village all the way from more or less where the current quarry site is, eastwards, through Tor, through Torrave, through Fachia, past the old schoolhouse that Nangle built, past Marjorie Wallace's house, all the way over to the back of Pure Magic, and beyond, about 100 metres beyond Pure Magic, and then the road stops. And I always, as an archaeologist, thought, I wonder, did that road carry on to Dugort? It would be the obvious thing, but it isn't on Boyd's map, it isn't on the first edition Ordnance Survey, there's no sign of it from aerial photographs. And I was beginning to do the old duck thing. If it looks like a duck, sounds like a duck, and quacks like a duck, it's probably a duck. And I was beginning to think, maybe there wasn't a road. But I said, why on earth would that be the case? Until I came here. So on the Ordnance Survey map, there's a road that runs from that inlet there. That's where the killing is. So that inlet there, on the right-hand side of that inlet, you can see on the headland there, that's where the killing is. But there's a road in the Ordnance Survey that leads up to this point, and then there's a T-junction, and it heads 100 metres in that direction, 150 metres in that direction, and the road which you'll walk on heads 150 metres in that direction, and it stops. Doesn't go anywhere. And I put 2 and 2 together. I might have come up with 6, but I think that what we're looking at, the road simply gives access to the working ground. It's not an access road as such. It only serves. So you come down off your village to the road, you go left or you go right, and that gives you access to your fields. It's not one of these things that takes you anywhere. It's just simply a purely function. And I think that might be the explanation as to why the road on the east side at the back of Pure Magic doesn't go anywhere else except to that point. That once you get to the end of the road, you're at the end of the road that was owned by the people who actually lived in the villages, and beyond that point was commonage, and the road never went anywhere. I'm done.